Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today the subject of my lecture is non-defining relative clauses used for things. In the previous lecture, we discussed defining relative clauses along with first part of the non-defining relative clauses as well. And in this lecture, we will discuss non-defining relative clauses and also the next type of relative clauses as well. We use subject as subject, we use which, and as object we can also use which, and as we can also use this non-defining relative clause as object of a preposition. Here we see that is not used here. First of all, for example, that block which cost 5 pound million 5 million pound to build has been empty for years. The 8:15 train, which is usually very punctual, was late today. These are two sentences. First starts from here and ends here, and the next is the 8:15 train, which is usually very punctual, was late today. So which cost 5 million pound is a non-defining relative clause here, and here which is usually very punctual is non-defining clause. In speech, we would be more likely to say, you can say it in speech, you can say these sentences like this: that block cost 5 million pound to build and has been empty for years. And the 8:15 train is usually punctual, but it was late today. This is in speech, but in written form, you normally write in this shape. B, object, which that is also not used here, and the which can never be omitted. You can say that in non-defining relative clauses you usually use which, and you cannot omit which when you are using it as object. For example, she gave me this jumper which she had knitted herself. Or you can also say she gave me this jumper semicolon she had knitted it herself. This is not if, this is it. All right, this is typing mistake. These books, which you can get at any bookshop, you will give you all the information you need. Or you can also say it like this: these books will give you all the information you need. You can get them at any bookshop. So you can also use which as object, as non-defining relative clause, and you can also say you can also write the sentence in this way. Usually use this form in speaking and this form in writing, and this is these the first form is very formal one. Next case is object of a preposition. Here normally preposition comes before which, or when you say a sentence informally, you move the preposition to the end of the clause. For example, here in these examples, you can see that the prepositions are used with which or before which. In the first example, Ashton Forest, through which we will be driving, isn't a forest any longer. All right, you can also say this example in this way: Ashton Forest, which we will be driving through. Here you are using which, and then you are you are moving the preposition to the end of the clause here. Which we will be driving through is not a forest any longer. So this second sentence is informal and the first one is formal one. And the same is the case with the next example as well. Let's move towards the next slide here. Which with phrasal verbs. You can also use which with phrasal verb as well. For example, the verbs like look after, look forward to, put up with, etc. So you can use them with which. For example, this machine, which I have looked after. This is not looked after. This is typing mistake. Which I have looked after uh, for 20 years. This is or, but actually again this is typing mistakes. You can say that I have looked after for 20 years is still working perfectly. All right. So this which I have looked after, here you can see that which have been used with the phrasal verb, like look after is a phrasal verb. Your inefficiency, which we have put up with, this is put up with, right? Which we have put up with for too long, is beginning to annoy our customers. Possessive form is whose or of which. For example, his house, whose windows were all broken, was a depressing sight. Whose windows? Whose windows does mean his house, the windows of his house. The car, whose handbrake wasn't very reliable, began to slide backwards. And here this is a description of whose are of which. Whose is generally used both for animal and things, of which is possible for things, but is unusual except in very formal English. Of course, here you can also use of which instead of whose, but you will use it in very very formal English. Normally you are allowed to use this whose as well. Next kind of, or the third kind of relative clauses is the connective relative clauses. The pronouns are who, whom, whose, which, etc. Commas are used as with non-defining clauses, as we also use comma with non-defining clauses as well. So we can also use, similarly, we can also use comma with these connective relative clauses as well. Connective clauses do not describe their nouns but continue the story. All right. So the unlike the defining relative clauses, these connective relative clauses do not describe or define their nouns. All right, but they continue the story. They are usually placed after the object of the main verb. For example, I told Peter, who said it wasn't his business. So here you are not defining Peter, all right? You are continuing the story which have been started here with the sentence at the start of the sentence. For example, I told Peter, who said it wasn't his business. You're not defining Peter here. You're not describing Peter here, all right? You are just continuing the story, or after the preposition plus noun as well. For example, I threw the ball to Tom, who threw it to Anne. All right. So here you can also use it after preposition plus noun. Here this is preposition and this is noun, and you can use connective relative clause after preposition plus noun as well. Next slide, we have some more examples on connective relative clauses. They can be replaced by and, but, plus he, she, etc. You can also replace them but and but, etc. I threw the ball to Tom and he threw it. So here you are replacing the connective relative clause with and he, and you can also replace it with but he or but she or and she, etc. Sometimes it may be difficult to say whether a clause in this position is non-defining or connective. Yeah, sometimes you will get confused whether the clause under discussion is non-defining or connective. So you need not worry about this because the two forms are the same. Both the forms are the same. More example of connective clauses are here. You can get some more examples. He drank beer, which made him fat. All right, this which made him fat is a connective relative clause. You can also write the sentence in this way: he drank beer and it made him fat. So same strategy has been applied in these examples as well. We went with Peter, whose car broke down before we were halfway there. Or you can also write it like this: we went with Peter, but his car broke down before we were halfway there. Next case is we can use one, two, etc., few, several, some, etc., plus of, plus whom, or which. All right. You can also see some examples in use number 80 as well. Let's have a look at examples which are given here. I bought a dozen eggs, six of which broke when I dropped the box. So you are continuing the story here, and with the help of a connective relative clause. Six of which, all right, one of whom, several of whom. All right, the lorry crashed into a queue of people, several of whom had to. You can say this is HRE. This is not here. This is again a typing mistake. Let me correct it. Actually, this is had to have only. Several of whom had to have hospital treatment, which can also stand for a whole class. You can also replace the whole class with which, not replace. You can also use which for a whole class. For example, the clock struck 13, which made everyone laugh. So, which made everyone laugh? What made everyone laugh? When the clock struck 13. So, using which for the whole class here. Same is the case here. You are using which for this whole class. Same in this case and same in the next example as well. What as relative pronoun and which as connective relative. All right, we have already discussed these things as well. What as relative pronoun here and which as connective relative. What is equal to the thing that, the things that. What here means that the thing that or the things that. What we saw astonished us. It does mean that the things that we saw astonished us. When she sees what you have done, she will be furious. When she sees the damage that you have done, she will be furious. You can replace the example with this as well. Be careful not to confuse the relative with what with the connective relative which, right? You do not confuse these both words. What relative pronoun and which as connective relative. Remember that which must refer to a word or group of words in the preceding sentence. Whenever you use which, so it refers to a word or a group of words in the preceding sentence, in the sentence which you have already used. While what does not refer back to anything, what does not go back, it does not refer back, it does not point out it does not point out back to anything. All right. The relative what is also usually the object of a verb, while the connective which is usually the subject. Connective you which is again this is another difference that relative what is usually the object of a verb, whereas uh, while the connective which is usually the subject. You can see these two examples here. So he said and some of the roads etc here which is used as subject, all right, and here what is used as object. The importance of commas in relative clauses. Oh, this is very, very important. Remember that a defining relative clause is written without commas. Note how the meaning changes when commas are inserted. So when you write defining relative clause, you write them without comma. Whereas in of course, connective clauses or relative clause or non-defining relative clauses, you use comma. So whenever you use comma, meaning changes. How? Let's have a look at the examples here. The travelers who knew about the floods took another road. Here there is no comma. Whereas in case B, the travelers who knew about the floods took another road. So there is a difference here. What's the difference? In A, we have a defining relative clause. So this is the first kind of the relative clause. This is defining relative clause, which defines or limits the noun travelers. So it defines or limits the noun travelers. So this class only tells us about the travelers because it defines the noun. The function of defining clause is to define the preceding noun or pronoun, right? So this clause here, who knew about the flood, this also defines or limits the noun travelers. This sentence therefore tells us that only the travelers who knew about the floods took the other road. So this only defines the travelers. So this sentence tells us the travelers who knew about the flood, who knew about the floods, they took another road. All right, and it implies that there were other travelers who did not know and who took the flooded road. So this also tells us that they 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 are not all. The travelers are not all the travelers. All right, we are just talking about the travelers, only the travelers who knew about the floods. All right, we are only talking about those travelers who knew about the floods. So they took another road. Whereas in case B, we are taking travelers as a whole. For example, here we have a non-defining relative clause, and it which does not define or limit the noun it follows. This sentence therefore implies that all the travelers knew, this is not blue, this is new, knew about the floods and took the other road. All right. So here we are talking about all the travelers, whereas here we are talking about only the travelers who knew about the floods. So they took another road. You can also apply the same rule on example C and D and E and F. Here in C, the boys who wanted to play football were disappointed when it rained. And indeed, the boys, comma, who wanted to play football were disappointed. So in sentence C, it implies that only some of the boys wanted to play football. There were presumably others who did not mind whether it rained or not. Whereas in example D, it implies that all the boys wanted to play and all were disappointed. All right. So whereas here in example C, we can see that it implies that only some of the boys wanted to play football, whereas there were also some boys who did not mind whether it rained or not. And same as the case in E and F, The wine which was in the cellar was ruined. The wine, comma, which was in the cellars was ruined. In sentence C, it implies that the only some of the wine was ruined. Presumably, some was kept elsewhere and escaped damage. Whereas in sentence F refers, it implies that all the wine was in the cellar and got ruined. So here we also have some more examples of whoever, whichever, whatever, etc. So whoever pronoun and whichever pronoun and adjective, it can mean the only who, he who, she who. For example, whoever gains the most points wins the competition, whichever of them, etc. You can have a look at these examples, they are very interesting. And in next slide, we have some more examples regarding whoever, whichever, whatever, etc. All right. So here, whoever, whichever, etc. They mean that no matter who, all right, I will win whatever happens or whichever, whatever happens. Don't forget to write. It does mean no matter what happens. And in this case, so whatever, wherever, they indicate the speaker's ignorance or indifference. All right. They can also show the speaker's ignorance and they can also show the speaker's indifference. It shows that the speaker is not concerned whatever is being done. For example, he lives in Vic, wherever that is. All right. Here, wherever does mean it doesn't concern speaker. Speaker has no concern with this. I don't know where it is, and I'm not very interested. When you are not interested in something, you also say the words like this, whatever, wherever, etc. Here, whoever, when you separate these two words, so there is a little difference in the meaning as well. We also discussed it in the previous lecture, uh, point number 61, when we were discussing interrogatives, etc. WH words. I lost 7 kilos in a month. However, did you lose so much in in such a short time? So you separate them in some cases when you show surprise, when you show anger, when you show excitement, etc. All right. Here, however, did you lose? Here you are showing some sort of surprise. So this is the end of today's lecture. I hope you have understood it. If you still have some question, please do ask me in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching.